This episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks is brought to you by Gigabyte's AMD X570 Aorus motherboards for third-generation AMD Ryzen 3000 processors. Hit the link in the description below for more details. In this episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks, we've got big, bad Threadrippers, the best GPUs for high refresh rate gaming. Easy for me to say. Acer Predators, MiSTer DIY retro gaming, Samsung Galaxies of the S20 variant, and a whole lot more, including a very special giveaway announcement coming up next. Welcome back to yet another episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks. Been a while. Good to see you folks again. Thanks for joining us. We took a little bit of a reprieve there because things got super busy, and that's what happens when things get super busy. But we're back. We're back in action with lots to talk about since the last cast. Oh my goodness. Everything from high-end desktop to all kinds of crazy stuff in mobile to you name it. We've got stuff to talk about. Marco, you've been cranking away on the good stuff. How you doing over there?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, as you mentioned, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. I managed to do a little traveling and to get sick to the point where I couldn't get out of bed for a few days. So it has been an adventure. I'm still trying to catch up. But we're back. We're in our 5:30 Wednesday slot. We're ready to rock, and we have some cool stuff to talk about. So we will get to it shortly.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, you know, we should tell the folks you don't have any deadly viruses, right? Like you got pretty darn sick too.
I did. So it actually a funny story. I got hit with E. coli again. Long story. Oof. But when I went to urgent care, they had to ask, have you been exposed to anybody that has been in China recently? And 3 weeks before, we were at CES, and I'm sure we were exposed by people that were in China. And we had a meeting with a certain large phone manufacturer the day before. Right. And I didn't know if any of them were in China, so I had to say yes. And to watch the nurse step back in fear when I said yes was kind of fun. But everything turned out okay. Nothing 9 days of antibiotics couldn't fix.
Crazy stuff. Your health is everything, isn't it? Like you really, you don't appreciate it. You take it for granted until that day that, you wake up feeling lousy for whatever reason. And you realize, man, every day's a good day that you're healthy, right?
Exactly. Luckily today I'm feeling like $100.
$100, a full $100. Beautiful. Beautiful. Chris, are you feeling like at least $57.98 worth or something?
I mean, I'm better now. I also got hit with a stomach virus of some kind last week, so I was down and out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is also why we didn't have a stream last week. But I seem to be back on the better side of things now, so thankfully I have improved, and thankfully it wasn't coronavirus. So
guys, I'm going to knock on wood right now. I'm knocking. The wood is right here. It's my desk, and I'm knocking on it. I have not been sick since I can't remember when.
Yeah, that's what I said to
Jinxed it right there.
That's what I said to the police chief on Tuesday, right before I got really sick. So and I did knock on wood. It didn't help. So
really?
You've just doomed yourself.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I'm feeling pretty chipper, and I'm certainly not going to brag about it. But whatever I'm doing these days is working. It's it's been over a year, and but yeah, like there's some nasty stuff flying around, and I haven't been traveling a lot lately. I will say that I've got some travel coming up to the West Coast to see my friends at NVIDIA for GTC, GPU Technology Conference coming up in March. So that'll test the immune system, perhaps. But that's if they have it, which they've boldly said they plan to have it, and come check it out. It'll be worth the trip. So I'm fully expecting to attend in sunny San Jose, where hopefully the germs are scarce. But hey, we're alive and kicking, boys. So you got that going for us. That's a good thing. All right. Well, let's dig in. It's been a long time, so we got lots to cover. Hey, Raymond. Hey, Michael. Some folks in the chat. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining us. But we've got lots to talk about, from Threadrippers to beastly GPUs and monitors and all kinds of stuff. Marco, we are overdue for a discussion on this, but you did in fact take the AMD Threadripper 3990X 64-core 128 thread. Oh my God. GPU around the test track with all of its fat cache and unbelievable amounts of throughput. What did you think about said chip?
I think the 3990X is an absolute monster. So this thing's nuts. If you're familiar with this latest third generation of Ryzen Threadripper processors, you know AMD's moved to a chiplet topology with an I/O die. And essentially, they're pairing as many 8-core chiplets as they want, it seems. Now, actually, the 3990X is the big boy. It's 64 cores, 128 threads. So 8-core chiplets paired to the I/O die, quad-channel memory support, works on the same TRX 40 motherboards, and actually, surprisingly, has the same 280-watt power envelope as the 3970 and 3960X. Clock speeds have been tweaked, so base clock of 2.9, way lower than the other guys. Boost clock of 4.3, also a few hundred megahertz lower than its little brothers. But overall, I mean, there's so much compute horsepower. What an absolute monster. And, you know, unlike the first-gen Threadrippers where there was some quirkiness, you know, with NUMA support and the way memory wasn't attached to every die, lots of the quirkiness with performance is sort of gone with this platform. There are some issues with having more than 64 threads because Windows does group threads into blocks of 64 and some software doesn't scale past 64 threads. But overall, just insane high-end platform. Of course, it is a $4,000 chip, so it better be high-end. But what do you see when you come look at the numbers? If I jump to a workload that can tax all of those threads, like let's say Cinebench, you're looking at a 24,579 score. What does that mean? That means Intel's closest desktop 28-core part is about half as fast at 13,776. So Intel's in a single socket, Intel really can't get close to this. It's not even in the same ballpark for multi-threaded workloads. And single-threaded workloads, because those big 28-core chips are still based on basically Skylake, AMD's got the single-thread advantage as well in lots of cases. So, I mean, just an absolute monster of a chip. But then if you look at something like PC Mark, where all of those immense resources are not going to get utilized all the time, you see that the 3990X ends up in the middle of the pack. And same for gaming, like it doesn't lead in any of the gaming because games aren't going to take advantage of all those threads, and the clock speeds are a little lower on here. Despite that huge monstrous cache on this thing, it's just not always going to lead in gaming. So that tells you the chip is not for everybody. The price also tells you the chip is not for everybody, but overall, absolutely killer processor. It's just, it advances the high-end desktop processors to heights that we've never seen before. It's nuts.
Yeah, let's take a step back and touch base on a spec that I always find interesting about this chip. When you talk about the chiplet topology that AMD has employed and really pioneered for all intents and purposes for x86 desktop processors, there's lots of connections, I guess, that need to be made between all these chiplets, between cache, between memory controllers, and via that Infinity Fabric. And the way AMD hides that latency, that round trip latency between cores and getting on and off those cores with data, is with this fat local cache. So 256 meg on a 3990X, 256 meg of L3 cache, another 32 meg of L2 cache. So 288 megs of fast cache on board. What are your thoughts about that? And I guess the future of processor architecture, because to me, it seems like, man, they made things really efficient with 7 nanometer die. They're able to squeeze 64 cores on a chip like this. Granted, it's a big honking chip, no question about it. But then they're able to recoup some of that latency by giving it such a fat local cache And cache usually takes a lot of die area too, by the way. So they lose a little bit and have to spend some die real estate on cache. Memory structures are big.
I do think you're saying that 256 megs of cache way too casually, because even the first laptop I had, and I'm a young guy, in, 2003, 2004, had 256 megs of system RAM.
Right. Oh yeah. No, I'm not saying it casually. It's amazing that they're able to build that sucker, with that kind of cache. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts, Marco, and then Chris, what you think about this in terms of how chip architecture is going to be shaped moving forward. I mean, are we talking all monolithics, or is the chiplet here to stay across the board?
Unless there's some major breakthrough at TSMC or Intel with the difficulties as geometries have gotten smaller to scale frequency and to get the yield that you want for the larger chips, I think the chiplet topology is going to be here for quite a while. The Threadripper kind of shows why, like with that large cache and with the advances AMD's made with their Infinity Fabric, these separate chiplets, and the other thing to note is the I/O die is built on a different process. So you have 7 nanometer chiplets, 12 nanometer I/O die. So now you don't have to have a single process for the entire processor, and it behaves like a monolithic chip. Yes, there are corner cases where you can show latency from CCX to CCX is higher, but for the workloads a chip like this is designed for, these wide, super wide multi-threaded workloads where you can essentially hide lots of latency, it works and it makes sense. And you see what AMD is able to do versus the struggles Intel's going through right now. So unless somebody has a big manufacturing breakthrough where they can all of a sudden make big many-core chips with and power and frequency scales like you'd expect from a new node, I think chiplets are here to stay. AMD made some good bets, and it's obviously paid off.
Yeah, when you talk about how AMD compared at CES in January, this roughly $4,000 chip, $3,990 to be exact, versus a $20,000 dual socket Intel Xeon platform, and edging it out in a 3D render V-Ray, which is a high-end workstation, rendering workload. I mean, that just speaks volumes. It's like, wow, what you can do in a dual socket platform with the heaviest metal you can get out of Intel versus a single socket on a what really is a high-end desktop enthusiast platform. It's not server class like that Xeon comparable. So, I mean, really just kind of crazy turning of the tables and the architectures. Chris, what are your thoughts on this? I know these kinds of high-end chips are near and dear to your heart as an IT guy looking for performance per footprint.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. As you said, it is not a server chip, but it's going to find its way into a lot of very high-end workstations. Anyone pushing heavy computational loads is going to want this chip. And, you could even slice up the system and virtually deliver it, I'm sure, to multiple workers like you would with a server. But, either way you look at it, it's going to be insane performance. Now, has anyone looked at specifically how the latency impact is between switching loads between chiplets and then switching between actual sockets on multi-socket systems?
Not that I know of. I mean, because with EPYC, you have much wider memory. I'm sure that it would be different. Well, you know what? I shouldn't say that because I believe it's the same protocols. It's still Infinity Fabric between sockets as well.
It is, yeah.
That it might not be all that much different. Maybe just the wire latency because it's further apart. But the latest EPYC, the second gen EPYC, and the chiplet topology and the latest iteration of Infinity Fabric has kind of erased lots of the weirdness that came with the older ones.
And Chris, now, what you were referring.
I want to point out one limitation that Chris mentioned it, and it kind of jarred it in my head. One of the limitations with the Threadripper versus an EPYC is, and we don't know if this is an artificial limit yet, but 256 gigabyte limit on the RAM. So lots of people were kind of up in arms. Hey, you can have a terabyte on some Xeons, and if you're doing these massive multi-threaded workloads, you might want more than 256 gigs. But that is one of the drawbacks to Threadripper, but I'm not clear on whether it's an actual, artificial limitation that could be eliminated with a BIOS update, or if it's, actually it's impossible to exceed 56.
Was that just like with Windows 10 Pro? Like, does Windows 10 Enterprise or Windows Server still have that limitation?
No, it's a spec limit on the 3990X.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Still.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and Chris, I think what you were referring to as well on the Intel side, when you talk about a dual socket Xeon platform competing with the likes of a single socket 64 core Threadripper, yeah, there's latency between those sockets. There's round time travel if you have to share data between the sockets, and one of the strengths of AMD over the years, even back when, in the days of hypertransport, is that their serial switching, their serial connectivity technology is very strong. And that's what they've been able to employ on chip. And then now between the sockets as well in multi-socket, server configurations for EPYC. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
And that's what I was trying to get at with, we're saying, okay, there's these certain workloads where you get that disadvantage hopping between chiplets, but if it's not alleviated by multi-socket systems either, and they're hitting the same issue, then it's not really a problem when there's not a better monolithic solution.
Right. Yeah. When there's not a better single socket solution, absolutely. The intrinsic, latency is there, socket to socket, and it has to be. You're going over a fabric one way or the other. Some serial interconnect. Cool stuff. Marco gets to play with the toys. Marco, are you going to build yourself a Threadripper workstation?
Well, I'm on a previous gen Threadripper now. I don't think I'm going to touch this rig because I'm going to jinx it. Man, you're jinxing me. This has been super stable. It's been good.
We're going to need to break out
since
the
I built
voodoo
it
to get through this episode, I think.
I know, right? We might have to, say a prayer to Jobu. But yeah, it's been stable, so I don't think I want to touch it as much as I would love to throw that thing in a rig. I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to keep it for testing.
I have an AMD Ryzen 9 3900X 12-core CPU for my rig, and it is supremely stable. The folks at Main Gear, as you know, back in the day, built it with me this summer, and so built it with us. Marco, you were there, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. And it's like, it doesn't ever even hiccup. So good stuff.
And yet,
a couple of quick things before we move on. We have just some comments from Michael Mitchell in the chat. First, he asked me if I was worried when I was talking to the nurse. I wasn't, because I knew what my symptoms were. Now, second, he's saying, I think you need a high level of cache to keep the cores fed. And that's true of basically any processor. The faster, if you can keep more data closer to the processor, ultimately the better throughput you're going to get. So yeah, that huge cache obviously does help the 3990. And then he's also wondering how many people would have more than 256 gigs in their workstation. And yeah, that's a good question. The audience for something like the 3990 is already small, and then the audience that would have more than 256 gig is small as well. So I'm sure there are some content creators, some animators that would probably want more, but yeah, it's not a large number.
Yeah, when you talk about HPC or data center servers where hundreds of gigs of RAM are sometimes employed, those are usually large data sets, large databases. This is more of I'm 3D rendering. I'm doing stuff like real-time rendering and for movie and animation and content creation that used to take days to render, that now on a beast like this doesn't, takes minutes, hours, whatever. And so I think 256 gigs of RAM is probably pretty stout. Yeah. They'll figure a way to fill it up, though. It's a beautiful thing. Gotta love technology. It's exciting, always changing, and always something
also known as 8 Chrome tabs.
8 Chrome tabs. I got to tell you, and we'll have to move on quickly here, but I've been impressed with Edge with the Chrome engine.
Yep, me too.
Kind of nimble, digging it. Yeah, Microsoft doing the Chrome engine pretty well. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to graphics cards. Our good friend Ben Funk. Ben Funk, who is the new review extraordinaire, who's been helping us out these days with some great content, decided to round up the best NVIDIA and AMD GPUs for high refresh rate gaming. And it sounds easy. What's your target? Well, 1080p. Let's go with that. And north of 120 hertz. Let's go with that. Basically, these are folks that want fast frame times, fast refresh on their monitors, and fast, high FPS to go with it, so that in super Twitch action, whether you're a Fortnite champion or whatever, Battlefield 5, maybe you're doing CS:GO, whatever tickles your fancy, where you got to take out your competition quickly in milliseconds matter. That's what we aimed to show. And this is a top 10 list, if you will. And Ben started sort of with the upper mid-tier, which was the Radeon RX 5700 XT series of cards from AMD, and then stepped through several other variations of NVIDIA GeForce cards, RTX 2070 Super, all the way through 2080s, 2080 Super, and 2080 Ti. Lots of options here. EVGA, Gigabyte, Asus, they're all in the mix. Lots of OEM cards. Founders Edition card made it into the mix. NVIDIA's RTX 2080 Super Founders Edition made it into the mix. But what struck me with this piece is when you consider, what your goal is, what really do you need for, ultimate, maybe you're not making $5 million a month as a Fortnite superstar, right? But you just want to be competitive in the arena, so to speak. So what is that buttery threshold of high refresh rate monitor, high FPS that's fast enough to get it done, that give you that edge? We put up a couple of benchmark graphs that shows you where the cards fall. And of course, the more powerful card, the more you spend north of like $400, the better your results are, north of 144 frames per second or 144 hertz in the case of the monitor. But really, how much of it's overkill, and is it 120 or 100 hertz? That's kind of the magic threshold before. And I'm not sure. I don't think Ben got into this too much. He really was like, here's the numbers. Here are the cards that can do it, which is fine. That's what we're making as a recommendation. But really, where do you reach a point of diminishing returns where you got to be that super fringe 1% that takes the prize from Fortnite tournaments, global Fortnite tournaments, to care? And then at like 120 hertz on back or whatever it is, you're close enough. You're doing good enough. Any thoughts there, Marco?
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I kind of feel the same way as you. If you're north of 90 frames per second all the time, in terms of just general gaming, you're in a pretty damn good place. Things are going to be smooth and buttery. Your gaming is going to be great. However, this is interesting data to me, because if you sprung for 144 hertz 1080p panel, and you want to make sure you're getting the most out of your investment, we can now show here, because he's got the 99th percentile and 95th percentile, that in a game like Fortnite, using high settings, 99% of the time, a 2080 Super is going to be right around 140 frames per second. So only 1% of your experience are you not taking full advantage of your monitor. So as an enthusiast, I kind of like that data. It's sort of like, okay, now I need a 2080 Super with that 1080p monitor, and lots of people say, oh, you're nuts. You don't need a 2080 Super for 1080p. Yeah, you don't if you want to just stick around 60 frames per second,
right,
with super high settings. But if you want to just exploit your hardware completely, this just shows you really still, even in 2020, can never have too much GPU horsepower.
Yeah, I will say, and then Chris, I want to get your take on this too. I will say one GPU that should have made it probably more prominently in the mix for that upper mid range where folks are like, look, I want to push north of 120 frames per second for my monitor. But I don't have a big bank. And so, like the 5700 XT, a competitive solution from NVIDIA in that space would be the 2070 Super, the RTX 2070 Super. And I think we did mention it. We just didn't have it dropped in a pictorial or a price point. Did we? No, I don't think so. No, just 2080 Supers on down. So the 2070 Super is an option. It's going to drop in right around that 5700 XT price point and or performance curve, I would say. Maybe a little bit north in some cases, a little bit south in others. So that's another option. But yeah, you're talking GPUs that are north of $400. I mean, it's like $400. If you want carte blanche, any game at good quality, high or better, that's what you need to drop, is essentially what we're saying. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah,
are we being snuts?
A lot of what you said. I mean, so games that have a lower graphical fidelity, like Fortnite, you can push that up into the high and epic with these cards, and you can hit 120 FPS solid, at least with the 2080 Super, which is great. But that's a lot of horsepower. And then moving to a more graphically intense game, Battlefield, I mean, looking here to get in the neighborhood of 120, 144 hertz, you're dropping down to medium low settings with high-end cards to get that. So games are very intensive these days, and it can be very pretty to look at a game in 4K and take in all the details and this and that. But when you're in these fast twitch games where every frame matters, 1080p is still a good amount of resolution. It's still kind of the de facto standard. And, when you got to push those high frame rates, it matters.
Yeah.
And another quick point, this is one of those things where if you don't experience it, you don't know what you're missing. So if you are used to gaming on a 60 hertz panel and you have a decent mouse and a decent keyboard, it feels a certain way. You sit down in front of a PC with a high DPI mouse, 144 hertz panel, and a GPU capable of pushing it, and the fluidity and the smoothness and your accuracy, it does go up. You can feel it. If you haven't experienced it, you don't know what that's like either, though. So it's one of those things where, if you're into it and you understand the benefits, you want it.
Not to mention the advantages you get visually with adaptive sync in there, whether it's G-Sync or I am blanking on AMD's. FreeSync. There we go. Yeah. When you aren't able to get that 120, 144 hertz all the time, that adaptive sync can save you from screen tearing and some other little issues. And then this isn't even mentioning the 240 hertz and beyond monitors that are out there on the market now that I don't think any GPU can really satisfy in these kinds of titles. It maybe things like CS:GO or something like that where you can push 300 FPS. But with the newer titles, that's tough.
Well, what's interesting, and that's what strikes me about this phenomenon of high refresh rate monitors. I tend to be the business head at HotHardware. I think about things like market share and what manufacturers are doing to garner market share. And it occurs to me that there's a fair amount of engineering going into high refresh rate monitors right now. There's every major OEM brand, whether it be Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, all those guys, they all have these, what, for lack of better words, tactical displays that are, maybe as big as 27 inches, but 27 inches on down. And high refresh rate is what it's all about. It's not so much a focus on image fidelity as it is that high refresh rate. And they're catering to a market that's obviously justified the investment in development of this technology. So this is a big deal. Like, obviously esports is huge, competitive gaming is huge. We hear about the guys that, and lady gamers that kick butt and make millions of dollars, doing what they do, streaming, all that good stuff. But you would think it's a niche. It's not. There's actually a lot of folks doing this.
I mean, I've got these laptops behind me, all gaming laptops, and most of them have 140 Hz display, and 2 of them have 240 Hz displays in a laptop.
Yeah. There you
crazy.
go. There you go. I mean, it's good stuff. We love the tech. Faster is better. All that good stuff. And but yeah, it does take some serious GPU firepower. The other thing we should note is that the reason we took this approach with the article, and I encourage you, please read it. Chris dropped the link in the chat. Check it out. It's good data. We like to, back up buying recommendations with empirical data. That's important stuff. You need the data to back up your mouth. But when you look at this, it's like, these are all really good graphics cards, but you need a fair amount of horsepower to push that kind of frame rate. And so, if it's important to you and that's what you dig, fine. I mean, if you need to get to it another way and you don't mind dialing back the fidelity, depending on the game title, you can get away with that too. Some game titles you might not, but we chose Battlefield 5 and Fortnite is sort of both ends of the spectrum. Battlefield 5 may or may not be a fast twitch favorite. It's might be more of a, standalone, not battle royale, obviously not a battle royale multiplayer co-op kind of game. As much or as popular as a Fortnite, but it's a higher end load, and that's why we chose that Battlefield 5 to just show, okay, if you're going to push more pixels and do some advanced rendering, this is what the performance is going to look like. Fortnite, maybe it's take your pick, Apex Legends, whatever, CS:GO, if you're still doing that. That's a much less workload, so you can get away with a little bit less horsepower. So, yeah. Fun stuff. Good look, right?
Absolutely. I think most people would be surprised to know that 5% of the time a 2080 Super can't push Fortnite at 144 hertz. That's that's interesting. It's good data. Come check out the article.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, that's a good point. You would think a 2080 Super, it was like, okay, I'm crushing everything. Maybe. Maybe not.
Does that speak to graphical intensity or optimizations?
Both.
Probably a little both. Yeah. All right. Let's skip on. Let's move on to almost the opposite end of the spectrum. We're going to talk about retro gaming next. Oh no, actually, we're going to talk about monitors, are we? Yeah, let's talk about retro gaming next, and then we'll come back to monitors. Does that sound like fun? Why not? Sure. Because we got to shift gears. We can come back to gaming monitors in a minute, but we actually on the gaming front, we took a look at something, or we had Ben again take a look at something that's near and dear to his heart. He does a lot with the Raspberry Pi group of products, as well as the single board computer solutions that are out there, as well as some really customized stuff built on FPGAs. And he took a look at this platform called the MiSTer, and he had basically this MiSTer FPGA board for a DIY retro gaming console emulation piece. MiSTer DIY accurately simulating retro game consoles with FPGAs. So this thing has, I believe, yes, is it an Intel FPGA on board? It's a Terrasig DE10, Nano is the name of the board, and I believe it's a small Altera FPGA, which is now they were purchased by Intel, and he's playing all kinds of cool games on this thing, from Contra 3 to Super Mario Brothers. Marco, you're into this kind of stuff. What'd you think about this little soiree with Ben?
Yeah, the MiSTer is really cool, and it's not just about retro consoles. But before I jump into it, though, just a couple of quick comments from the chat. We have Ace Tech Sean and Michael Mitchell both chatting about displays. One thing I want to mention, Sean mentions that Asus has the ROG 360 hertz display coming. In chatting with Asus at CES about that monitor, They said, I'm sorry, NVIDIA actually mentioned this. It wasn't Asus, but we were talking about the Asus monitor, that they're on the road to 1,000 hertz. So, there is an effort to push refresh rates extremely high. And one of the benefits of that 360 hertz display was the sharpness of fast-moving objects. And you could actually see it. You'd think you can't, but the sharpness of text flying by, or bubbles above a character were noticeable. So that's kind of nuts. Yeah. So yes, high refresh rate gaming is here to stay. It might be a bigger focus moving forward. But now getting back to the MiSTer. The MiSTer is really cool. So this thing that Ben set up, it was the TerraSic DE10 Nano FPGA board, but it's paired to a bunch of other stuff. And the MiSTer, essentially, there's a group that have created cores for the MiSTer to emulate all these different platforms. So you can emulate lots of older gaming consoles and also lots of older PCs. Ben really only explores this for the gaming aspect, and he includes some really cool accessories like the 8-bit Do, M30 Genesis mini gamepad, and stuff like that. So it's really, this setup was geared towards retro console gaming, and it works extremely well in that regard. But you can even do like Amiga cores and Atari ST cores and Commodore 64. Those cores are available for the MiSTer. So you can emulate a ton of platforms on this thing. And what's cool is an FPGA, lots of people confuse this. An FPGA is not like software emulation. The hardware is essentially replicating the FPGA is replicating the old hardware. So it's like cycled correct and it behaves properly. You don't have the performance to emulate like the latest stuff, but for these older platforms, you can absolutely do it in an FPGA. And what's really cool now, if you look at the popularity of the NES Mini and, the Genesis Mini and all these retro little consoles, they're cool. They're like $60, $80. You have the C64 Mini, it's like $80. This entire platform that could emulate basically, any retro gaming platform, the way Ben built it, and his is like a nice high-end setup with lots of accessories, it's only $200. So you can basically, if you're willing to grab ROMs, if you're okay with that online, emulate any platform for $200. I think it's really cool.
Legal ROMs, of course.
Well, of course. Hey, look over there, guy.
You're funny. Ben, of course, underscores the fact that yes, you should legally own those ROMs. And there's two things that occur to me here that come into play. One, I'd like to talk about just sort of as a general discussion, but the first one about this platform specifically. The FPGA implementation is notable. As you mentioned, Marco, yeah, you've got Raspberry Pi, and you can do all these different emulations and software on standard ARM core-based single-board computers that are out there today. You can do this, cheaply, and it brings a fairly satisfying experience for those games of old. The FPGA is different in that you're basically essentially building a lot of the logic of that platform of yesteryear that game was written for, was custom targeted for. So it's different in the sense that it's as Ben noted, cycle accurate. It's much more like the real deal. And I don't know what title we're looking at there. Is that Galaga? What is that?
That's Galaga, yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm looking at that going, I spent so many quarters in the arcade on that thing. So cool. But that's the other part of the discussion that I wanted to just touch on real quick is retro gaming's kind of a big deal these days. People are getting into it. And why is that? I think it's because obviously there's nostalgia involved, and people love to go back to their childhood or younger days, whatever that was. It was a long time ago for me and you, Marco, maybe. More so for me. But there's that. But I also think back in the day, today we have unbelievable near photorealistic rendering, ray tracing and all this cool visual stuff that just, tries, to build on the immersion. Back in the day, they didn't have that to rely on, and they just made games that were fun. That was the focus.
Right. What you need is game your game idea, your game loop, and execution. The graphics are like eye candy to it, but if your game's not fun, your game's not going to be fun no matter how pretty it is.
Right. Yeah, that's the huge part. And I think as a rule, so many more games back in the day when you were just looking at pixelated, blobs on the screen. Yeah, they looked cool even back then for geeks, but it was about the gameplay. And if you couldn't figure out a hook to bring the gamer in, whether you cared about the storyline RPG, Leisure Suit Larry or whoever, or, something like you're looking there, a side scroller Street Fighter kind of thing where you're giving the gamer just enough reward, enough accomplishment, enough storyline, enough engagement. It's hard to capture that. And these days, I'm sorry that the big, beautiful graphics, they're getting it done in some games. Other games, it's like, okay, it's a pretty game to look at, but I am now bored and I'm going to move on. Maybe I'm jaded. Is that fair, Marco? Am I being jaded, or is that about right?
A little both. I think the simplicity of lots of the older games is what made them attractive to a lot of people. Like, if you take a game from today and you plunk a non-gamer in front of it, huge learning curve. You take a game like Pac-Man or Galaga and plunk someone in front of it, they're going to learn it in 2 minutes and still have fun. Whereas like a game today, you jump online and try to play whatever, you're going to get your ass kicked and it's not going to be fun. So it is what it is. If you don't have the skill and you jump into a Fortnite, you're dead. Some 12-year-old's going to make fun of your mother and you're going to be pissed.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's good stuff. Well, it's good stuff for sure. Either way, I mean, I think obviously there's merits to not only get good gameplay. These days, the games that succeed have combinations of excellent gameplay, engaging gameplay, addictive gameplay, and also great graphics. And I can probably think of a number of titles that have sucked me in, although I don't get enough chance to game lately, that do both. But yeah, like back then, it's like that's all they had, man. I mean, the pixels weren't pretty, and if you didn't make something fun, you were dead. So cool stuff. The MiSTer DIY. Check that out if you're into retro gaming. Ben shows you how to do it and covers all the ins and outs and links out to various resources in the article as well to help you get set up with the software side of it and all that good stuff. It's actually quite the thing. Ben knows his stuff when it comes to that kind of DIY retro gaming. Good stuff. All right. Let's move on to we'll shift gears back. Man, I'm gonna be all out of sorts here, but I'll call Marco in on the phone side when we close up on Samsung, and we got to start moving along. We got a turbo. We got a turbo. Let's turbo the Acer Predator CG437K. Oh my God! Could you get a more boring model name? It says Predator, but that is not a boring panel, and that's actually in our studio here. That is a 43-inch HDR G-Sync 4K panel by Acer. And oh, by the way, it also serves up 144 hertz refresh rate if you want. It does that in an overdrive mode. I want to say like standard mode is up to 120 hertz, but it does have a 144 hertz setting and 4,000:1 contrast ratio, 1 millisecond response time. This thing is dialed 3840 by 2160 max resolution. It is an absolute beast. Now it's a VA panel. It's not IPS, but it is HDR. Oh, I'm trying to think. Is it HDR? What's the spec on the HDR level? But it's an HDR panel. I want to say it's HDR 400. Anyway, it's bright as heck. It's a 4K panel, 144 hertz, and does high dynamic range, color reproduction. So you would think it's all that in a bag of chips, and it's a big display. This is a product for folks that, for a niche that needs that are looking for that ultra large display. Now I have in front of me right now, as I speak to you, a 34-inch Acer Predator, actually, curved display. It's kind of just about enough screen real estate for me. I took a look at this thing, the 43-inch, and for me, it was too much. It was too much to sit, 2 feet, whatever it is, away from a monitor on your desk. But there are plenty of folks that need this kind of screen real estate, that also want a game, that also, need those extra, want those extra inches, and this thing delivers. Now, when it comes to VA technology, you're going to lose a little bit of viewing angle capability. When you get off axis with a VA panel versus IPS, you do get some washout. More so, it's not quite as robust off-axis viewing. There's a pretty good picture right there. That tree frog still looks pretty good at probably less than 45 degrees off axis. But it's noticeable if you A/B it versus an IPS panel. You'll see that the IPS holds up better off axis. I will say, with a 43-inch panel like this, though, you're probably not going to have as much issue. I mean, you're going to back away from it a little bit more and maybe use it more like a TV in some situations, just because you can. I'm thinking about, some folks that are maybe in their apartment and they're using it. It's doubling as a TV or a media streamer, as well as a gaming monitor, as well as a work monitor. It's doing lots of different use cases. I could see that, and I think it's going to serve that purpose pretty well. But it was an interesting endeavor that Tuan took for us to check this out, because this thing is big, bold, and in your face. For me, the HDR thing on the desktop, I think, is not quite there yet. And by that, I mean, if you fire up a game or maybe it's Netflix content, what have you, in HDR, you're going to see the visual pop. You'll see that high dynamic range. You'll see the color range, and it's appreciable. On the desktop, when you're looking at standard color gamut content, unfortunately, there's a little bit of an issue right now with Windows, from what Tuan and what I can tell, where it can look really washed out. It can look over bright and washed out. And I found myself on the desktop using standard apps, maybe it's browsing the web or what have you, wondering what the heck's going on. I'm losing my colors. There's a glitch there.
Yeah, that's
Marco,
kind of a.
You know anything about that?
I do.
You guys? You do? Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an issue with HDR in general right now, because it's usually a 10-bit color depth and we're used to seeing displays, and all of our content is generally produced for an 8-bit depth on the desktop. And when you try and take a 8-bit image and put it on a 10-bit panel, it just doesn't quite line up right, and you do have to make choices in how much of the contrast ratio you're going to use, because if you go fully black to fully white on a HDR panel when it's not intended for it, it's not going to look right. So you're trying to take a subset of that color range and target it, but then if you overshoot that, then it starts to look washed out. So it's a lot of a challenge, and it's not going to be this monitor's fault. I'm not even sure that it's Windows' fault. It's just kind of a challenge of HDR.
Interesting. You would think they could figure out better workarounds for that in software. But
so that's one of the things AMD was working on with FreeSync 2 was like an auto switching modes of the monitor. I don't think it's ready for prime time yet, but yeah, being able to sense what the app needs and switch the monitor mode on the fly and the Windows mode, but yeah, it's not ready for prime time.
Yeah. I will say that the Acer panel does have an auto setting, so you can put it on auto and it'll stay SDR when viewing on the desktop, and then when you switch a game on, it'll click into that and detect the content properly. So there's that going on. And really, when you look at what's available in the market right now in this size range, the Acer Predator CG437K is kind of it. There's really nobody else out there yet. Asus has one that they've announced that's, on the way. But yeah, this is kind of the only game in town right now. 43 inches, HDR 1000. Thank you, Sean, for combing that out of the review. I couldn't read quick enough. G-Sync and 144 hertz or FreeSync. It's also FreeSync. It's adaptive refresh compatible with both. So really an interesting product to check out. And it's actually on sale. When we got the panel in initially, it was $14.99. It's now down to $11.99 on Amazon. So if you are interested in some big screen real estate, if you like them big, right, Marco, this baby might be for you.
Yeah, if you like them big, you like the Acer Predator.
He's sick.
You set it up. You did
I
that
did.
on purpose.
It's on purpose. I did. I led you on. Yeah. So check that out. I just dropped a link in the chat. Check out the review. Thank you, Tuan, for a good look at an interesting product, a unique product in the market right now, the Acer Predator CG437K. All right, let's move on to mobile and close this thing out quick because we have to announce giveaways too, because there's a big one coming. Let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy S20 and the LG V60 ThinQ 5G real quick. We have these products in-house for review. Actually, still waiting, Samsung. I'm looking at you for my Galaxy S20 Ultra that's supposed to be coming in. But Marco, you saw the Galaxy S20. We saw the entire family at Unpacked in New York. And interesting stuff. Beautiful phones. I will say that. 6.2 inch, 6.7 inch in the S20 Plus, 6.9 inch in the S20 Ultra. Man, those displays that Samsung puts together just blow me away every time I see them. They just have the best smartphone displays out there. That's what catches me. What did you think about these phones real quick?
Killer platform. So one thing Samsung that's really cool across all three of the new S20s, essentially all the same platform. They really differ in terms of their camera and their physical size. And because of their physical size, the battery capacity in each phone. But you're essentially looking at what a flagship phone in 2020 is going to look like. Snapdragon 865 with 5G modem. Up to 16 gigs in the S20 Ultra, but typically 8 to 12 gigs in the other models. Up to 120 hertz display refresh rate. I believe it will switch depending on the app to save battery life. All of the features that you essentially want in a smartphone, except maybe a headphone jack. But yeah, expandable via micro SD card slot. Now, we got hands-on time. We have video of all the phones. You can see lots of the cool features, and you can actually see them in action. We don't have benchmarks of the S20 yet, but we do have a Snapdragon 865 benchmark preview that will give you the gist of how these are going to perform. And what you'll see is the 865 is the fastest Android platform that money can almost buy. I believe these are available March 6th, so a couple more weeks. But yeah, crazy phone features, up to 100x zoom on the Ultra or a 30x zoom on the S20 and S20 Plus, and that zoom works. It's not a gimmick. We watched it zoom into the spine of a book from across a large room, and you could read the spine of the book. It was really cool. Yeah, so looking forward to these phones. Kind of pricey, starting at $1,000 on up to $1,600 for the top end S20 Ultra. But if you want a flagship phone, Samsung looks to have one of the killer options coming.
It's impressive stuff. Again, I think, in smartphones, we see a lot of iteration. And this time, Samsung seems to have brought true innovation in a couple spots. What you saw on video there was a multi-shot mode. That's also impressive. It detects a scene that you're shooting and determines some best options in terms of the shot style and also video as well. But in this case, it grabbed a bunch of shots and allowed you to choose from its selection. So there's AI going on. It's sampling the scene and saying, hey, I like this, I like this, I like this. What do you think? And that's just with one click of the button. So it's pretty cool and allows you to have a better chance of capturing the moment perhaps than you would on your own with one shot. So yeah, lots of stuff, lots of interesting bells and whistles there, lots of technology employed beyond just, hey, this is a faster processor, this is a bigger, beautiful display. The image sensors are crazy on it. Now, obviously, Qualcomm's Snapdragon platform supports up to 108 megapixel resolution in the camera array, and so Samsung employed that. That thing is just amazing as well to consider when you have that much pixel density captured, what you can work with in post. That's the important thing, folks, is it's not just what you see on your phone. Now you've got all those pixels captured that you can work with later, perhaps. And so,
yeah, and I've seen people talk about the pixel sizes, being so small on there and it affecting light capture and this and that. What really matters is the total sensor size, because yeah, the individual pixels are going to be noisier one to another, but you still have more detail to pull from to fix that noise, especially when these phones are doing that automatically. But yeah, this phone's sensor is a 1/1.3 inch sensor size or something like that, which is a lot larger than we've seen in previous phones. So its low light performance should be better, even though the actual pixel sizes are so small.
Yeah, Michael Mitchell makes a good point in the chat, and then we'll move on to real quick on the LG V63 ThinQ. Three pictures in the cloud, and your bandwidth is exceeded. Obviously, this is some of these features for real super high resolution, and it shoots 8K as well. It's more of a local experience, so you're going to have to be mindful of your bandwidth. But as 5G kicks into gear more, bandwidth plans are going to change, service plans are going to change, because people are going to be able to do a lot more untethered with 5G when that becomes much more pervasive. So stay tuned for more gyrations in the landscape for that. Shifting gears to the LG V60 ThinQ 5G, I actually was down in New York with the folks at LG last week, and I got to experience that phone. That is an interesting device to be sure as well. 6.8-inch OLED display. Also a beautiful display, I will say. LG is the other phone manufacturer, I think, that has some of the best displays in the market. Wouldn't you know, Samsung also a display manufacturer, LG also a display manufacturer. When it comes to OLED, those two companies do the best. And what you're looking at there is a dual screen device. The second screen is plugged into a screen case via USB-C, I should say a display in a case. The case and that secondary display will come with the phone, and they're saying it is priced sub Galaxy S20 base pricing. So not the S20 Plus, not the Ultra, but underneath the Galaxy S20 with its secondary display. No doubt, I think it's like a 7.7 ounce phone all by itself out of the display case. Put it in with the secondary display, and it becomes a much bigger device. If you are into having a phablet experience, a true phablet experience, now you can do things like secondary keyboard on that display, or a full, I should say, QWERTY keyboard on that display for a mini laptop-like experience. You also can use it like a gamepad. I actually showed some Call of Duty gameplay where the thumbsticks were down on the secondary display. Lots of different reasons you can think of. Also Snapdragon 865. There's Call of Duty going on right there. Also Snapdragon 865, 8 gig of RAM, 128 and 256 gigs of storage. But man, it's a big phone. And for me, that's what I struggle with, is once I get up above like 6.7 inches on a single phone, never mind a dual display phone, it's large for me. So that's one of the things you have to consider with these. I think the Galaxy S20 is like 6.2 inch. S20 Plus is like 6.7. This is 6.8. So it's right around that S20 Plus size. But it's a big phone. But man, if you need that real estate and you're a power user and you like that second screen, LG does it pretty well. The nice thing is it's got some ability to switch between modes and whatnot. It's got some software hooks built in that allow you to use that extra screen real estate for different apps and different controls. So they do a good job of implementing the software on it. But it's a bulkier kind of thing. So it just depends on what you're into. Marco, you've seen these before.
I have, yeah. It's a really, really cool device, and I agree with you. You're starting to push the limits of what's going to fit in a normal pocket. But if you're the kind of person that's thinking, I'm almost there where I can leave my laptop at home and get most of my work done on a phone, that second screen offers some interesting use cases. So might be worth carrying around something big. And you can also take that case off. So if you're just tooling around and you're not going to use the second screen, you can remove it and then you have a normal size phone. But yeah, when the second screen's attached, it is kind of bulky.
Yeah, what occurred to me with that is, a classic example where, you're traveling, maybe you're, hopping on a plane, whatever. You throw that display case in your bag, you get the main phone in your pocket. Now you sit down, you're at your seat, you drop down the tray table, and now you've got your little mini laptop. Maybe you're doing some Netflix viewing and whatever else. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So, and the price point's important. They're coming in what sounds like around less than $1,000 with two displays. I mean, the Galaxy S20 base is $1,000. So if they're under that with those two displays, okay. But pricing is not officially announced yet, so I can't say any more than that. So that's it. Check out the preview. The LG V60 ThinQ 5G rocks dual displays and Snapdragon 865. Check it out. We'll drop a link in the chat. Oh, actually, Chris already did. Thank you, Chris. All right, let's wrap
on top of it.
Yes, you have. All right, let's wrap up. We've got something to announce, and we're going to launch it on the site. But folks here watching the cast are going to get a little early tease. We are going to be giving away another killer gaming rig. It is going to be yet another AMD-infused gaming rig. Marco, you want to be Santa? Tell them about it.
Yeah, so we're still verifying some of the brands of specific components, but here is the absolute insane specs for another system we'll be giving away very soon. We just have to set up the Gleam and some little stuff. But Ryzen 9 3950X 16-core processor, GeForce RTX 2080 Ti, 32 gigs of RAM, 2 terabyte NVMe SSD, plus a 2 terabyte hard drive. Absolute killer gaming rig. All cooled by some nice Acer cooling inside. We need to thank Acer for sponsoring this one. It is going to be absolutely awesome. I think this might be the most powerful rig we've given away yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, going to be awesome. And just like all our other giveaways, very straightforward. Come engage on the site, like a couple of social media things, and that's really it. You'll be entered for to win the system. Random winner. And you will end up with just an insane killer gaming rig.
Yeah, and that, as you can see, folks, is an Alienware Aurora Ryzen Edition, 16-core Ryzen Edition. And that sucker right now is in my studio behind me. That's on my studio table. So I am looking forward to. I booted it up, and man, like Windows wasn't even set up or anything. It's like brandy new, fresh. I was pulling off the plastic. You can see the plastic in that picture, actually, the protective plastic. So it is a fresh, brand new, beautiful beast, and we're gonna give it away. So there. How do you like them apples?
Yeah, baby.
And with that, we will bid you adieu. Stick to HotHardware.com where you can find us on the web, and we will be announcing this giveaway shortly. I'm hoping we can get it out the door by the end of the week. And so you'll find us at HotHardware.com, Twitter.com/HotHardware, YouTube.com/HotHardware right here. Thumbs up, subscribe, Facebook.com. We're everywhere. Look us up. Follow us, subscribe. We give away cool stuff. We put you in the know when we can about the best technologies. Right, buddy?
Yeah, man. And one more quick thing. Everybody in the chat, thank you for watching. I want to ask a quick favor. After this video actually goes live on our YouTube channel, go make a comment on the video. I want to test something out. Do me that favor. So after this podcast is on our channel, go hit it again. And go make a comment. I'll really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And with that, we will bid you adieu. Thanks for stopping by.